Start the recorder.
Okay,
So
thanks.
I'm here with Vic DeCara. I'm Sam Reynolds. And DeCara, is that how you pronounce your name?
Well, the way you just said it the first time was the right way, and the way my family has been saying it for 2 or 3 generations is the way you said it the second time.
Okay, which do you prefer?
Either one.
Okay. So I'm here with Vic, and he has graciously agreed to talk with me about an article I'm writing on tropical and sidereal astrology. So thank you, Vic, for
Thanks.
being here early in the morning, or relatively early in the morning, after getting the
Thanks.
kids out. So I just have some questions for you. I mean, I checked out some of your interviews, particularly the one you did recently. I mean, I think it was more so last year or maybe the year before with Chris Brennan for his astrology school. Was it 2017 or 2018?
I think it was, God, the years go too fast. I think it was 2 years ago now.
Yeah, I think it was 2017 now that I think about it. So, I mean, it was helpful to kind of get a sense from your conversation with him, like some encapsulations of your key points. And just for me to recap, maybe save you some time, as I understood it from your discussion with him in 2012, after studying more so in terms of the actual, not Vedic astrology, but the Vedas, the Vedic tradition. You came to 2007, you had come into astrology and you were absorbing a lot. I come across in passing the crazy work of Ernst Wilhelm, right? And crazy was the word that you kind of used in the interview that people had associated with him, not necessarily that you had. Right. And you had been thinking about it, and then you had some crazy event, or not crazy, but some, serious event that had happened that you hadn't been able to predict using sidereal astrology. And you saw, once you had been thinking about the crazy ideas of Ernst Wilhelm, that you had come to some different realizations about the tropical zodiac, and that the event was clear there. And so since 2012, you've been immersed more so in the study of, the tropical zodiac, and you kind of, quote unquote, converted to use of the tropical zodiac. Is that pretty much exclusively in terms of that? In terms of using with the Rasis,
One thing I would say with that is I just don't want it to sound like it was event driven that I made my decision, because it's not. I'm kind of actually against that, because there's a million ways to skin a cat. Mm-hmm. So you can make a prediction from tea leaves, but what happened with that event in my life was it shook me up enough that I was willing to entertain.
I see. Mm-hmm.
I was willing to entertain looking at the logic behind the tropical zodiac in Vedic astrology. So it wasn't like, well, see, with tropical astrology, I could easily predict this one, so therefore tropical must be right. Right. Because there's going to be some things in tropical astrology that are difficult to predict.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. Right. That's my experience too. I mean, there are people who kind of go, I always say to those who are hardcore siderealists, when they say like, well, see, it makes sense looking at this person's chart this way or this particular event, when you kind of transform it or transfigure it to the sidereal zodiac versus the tropical. And I was like, that goes both ways.
Yeah.
At any given point. But I don't think we tropicalists talk as much about it, because I think we're more the mainstream in that sense. We're the dominant, paradigm that's mostly used. But we can get to that a little bit. So one of the influential texts from your studies of the Vedas is the Surya Siddhanta and the Puranas, right? Is that correct in terms of how you understand it? So can you just explain, for the audience who may be viewing this, and also for my notes, when you talk about the tropos, right, in terms of looking at particularly the turning points, can you just encapsulate what that means in relation to the embrace of the tropical zodiac? What you mean by that?
Oh, yeah. Well, every classical definition of the zodiac talks about it being pinned to 4 famous or important points. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter what culture you get your definition from. And actually, nor is there a competing definition. There's only this definition. And the definition in Sanskrit from Surya Siddhanta is Pachakra Nabhav Vishuvat Dvitiyam Samasutragam. That the hub of the zodiac is fixed to a line that you draw between equinoxes and solstices. Mm-hmm. So you draw a cross between equinoxes and solstices, and the hub of the zodiac, the thing that anchors it, is right where those lines cross. And then it clarifies even more that, when the sun passes this particular point, you'll know it because the days and nights will be equal.
Mm-hmm.
When the sun gets to this particular point, you'll be able to observe that because the day won't get any longer than that. That's the longest day.
Right.
And then they say, look, and then you divide this, each quarter of that, you divide into 3 sections, and then you get your 12 divisions, and this one is called Aries, and this one is called Taurus. It couldn't be plainer.
Right. And one thing, when you quoted it on Chris's show, I think you said it fully in Sanskrit, right?
Yeah.
That's one particular quote. And I swore I heard the word Ayanamsa, or what might be the root for Ayanamsa.
Yeah. Ayanam.
Ayanam.
Ayanam means solstice.
Solstice, right. So one thing I wanted to ask you about that, because you kind of getting now into more the nitty gritty of like what, you generally have talked about, not that you elucidated that particular key point of using the tropos. When you say that sidereal astrologers, Indian sidereal astrologers, use the Ayanamsa, which is based on the tropical zodiac, what do they say in contrast to that? I mean, like, what's the comeback to that? I mean, that seems like, okay, that's a big point, because if you used Spica, 23 degrees of Libra, right, is the key point and some change, right, just to be fair. If you use that as like kind of key point, and by virtue of that, you use as the polar opposite Aries, which has no particular star or asterism connected with it that we can observe, right? Unlike Spica, then I guess what's the comeback to that? Do they have one when you talk about that with them?
Well, they start to talk about what a jerk you are.
Okay.
That's it? Or they'll just divert it. Well, I mean, you lay out, this is why I want to just have, I've actually given an invitation for people to come and debate me face to face on the topic in an organized way. 10 minutes, you make your presentation, I respond 4 minutes, you respond 2 minutes, and I make my presentation. Because it's too much. It's just too much arguing back and forth. Like, let's just get the facts onto the table. You make your presentation, show everybody your theory. I'll give you a few critiques on it, and then I'll show everybody my theory. You give a few critiques on it, and let people hear the information side by side instead of everybody just pretending that the other person is stupid.
So is that true for all Ayanamsas? Like, maybe I'm just talking about the Lahiri. What about the other ones? I mean, like,
well, what do you mean by what do you mean by the Ayanamsa?
In terms of using Spica as like the key critical point by which we kind of are able to adjudicate the starting points for the sidereal zodiac, which is still a tropical, position to say 23 degrees Libra. So is that the same calculation point or the same kind of?
Okay, so Ayanamsa, like you noted that you heard the term Ayana in the definition of the zodiac. Ayanamsa, and Amsha means like a portion.
Okay.
So like, how much has the Ayana moved in reference to the star that was supposed to mark it? That's the idea behind the word Ayanamsa. So they inherent in that concept is the idea that we have a star marking the Ayana, the solstice, which is key to my understanding of how the whole history of this thing developed. Why are there stars mentioned in the astrology in the first place? And this is another interesting point. But why are stars correlated to zodiacs in the first place if it's not sidereal? It's because in the early days of calculating things, people had to fact check their math. It was newly developing math. They had to look with their eyes to check, is the moon really in Libra? Well, how would we know? Well, to see that star over there, it's crossed that star, then we're right. So they would make, and then Hipparchus said, yeah, but we can't always use the same star because it's going to move, or we have to make some kind of measure of how it moves. And in India, they have that with Ayanamsa. So the whole basis of Ayanamsa is we want to measure the discrepancy between our marker stars and the tropical points. So again, like, what's the comeback for that? Why is the tropical point important? Well, somebody who really knows their stuff will say, well, that's because you can't calculate the ascendant.
Otherwise.
But then, so what you have to do is you have to know what the siderealist will say is, well, you have to know, I believe, you have to know where the Ayanams are, the equinoxes and solstices are, so you can calculate the ascendant, but then switch it all back to sidereal.
I got you. So that brings up another question that I wanted to talk about, just in terms, again, the nitty gritty with it. Um, so one thing I don't know for certain, do Jyotishis, and probably that's the better term to say, do they use Antisha and Contra-Antisha in practice?
I don't even know what that is. What is that?
Okay, so those are solstice points where we look at the measures of the distance between two signs. So for instance, in terms of just taking the solstice point 0 degrees Capricorn, and also in terms of the measure of light. If we were to go and say the measure of light in terms of it being the quote unquote shortest day, longest night, and then we go like one day from that, into like, say, the 22nd, if that becomes like the next day after the actual solstice. Right. That day, 22nd, is equal in measure to the day before the actual solstice, which is the 20th, which is 29 degrees Sagittarius. And we can do that around the whole zodiac. So 29 degrees equals 1 degree Capricorn, and they go in 30-minute increments or 30-degree increments so that they're equal. So 29 plus 1 equals 30, 28, 2 degrees Capricorn, 28 Sagittarius, also is a solstice point. So we can do that with Aries. Aries has a solstitial point with Virgo. So 1 degree of Aries will be complementary to 29 degrees of Virgo. And why that's important, as a Muslim, I'm a practicing Muslim, one of the things I found that was fascinating is that using solstice points and using like the actual variance of light was one way that it's said to be that you could calculate the Kaaba, where you need to kind of be able to pray and direct to find the actual Qibla, the direction to pray. And that was fascinating to me because it got me thinking like, okay, if in tropical zodiac, we actually have like the accurate measures of daylight, and darkness and light. That seems like a testament in terms of, the zodiac working, especially as we have it with Antisha and Contra-Antisha.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We don't have anything like that to my knowledge. We don't have anything.
Okay, so I was always curious about that because I'm like, well, then that's kind of like a statement for it. It's an interesting question probably to pose more for Western sidereal astrologers than Jyotishis, right? But I was just curious, like, where, anyone would fall in that. So going back to like origin points and this kind of divergence between the zodiacs, because I know that you also said that you think that they may have happened 13 to 1700 years ago in terms of going more sidereal in India. I mean, and I think you were just conjecturing, so I'm not holding you fast to that and saying like, you said, blah, blah. So, but that's actually led to some interesting thoughts, not just that, but some interesting discussions I've had on Twitter. I don't know if you're very active on Twitter. I am. And one of the things that has been both engaging, disturbing, is talking to more, I want to say Hindu influenced people. When I say Hindu influence, I mean literally people who are Hindu in India. They may or may not be Jyotishis, right? And so one conversation has come up, and I just wanted to know where you fell with this. I once made a statement per like what has been talked about. I can't pronounce the name. Is Yavana
Jataka.
Yavana, say it again, please.
Yavana Jataka.
Yavana Jakata. Okay. In terms of it being obviously related to the Mediterranean, as you mentioned, but also usually translated as Greek. The idea among many Western astrologers is that it came from Babylon in terms of astrology's origins to Greece or to Egypt to some degree, or influence with some aspects in Egypt, then kind of has a confluence and novelty in Greece, and then that Alexander with his groups of people brings it to India. And I got some pushback on that, which I was grateful for, because I'm like, well, we don't know. I mean, I know there's some words that are common in a common use that may not have come originally from Sanskrit, use in Indian astrology or in the Jyotish. So I guess my question is, how much do you think is native born in India related to the zodiac? And how much has come from somewhere else? Did it come from Babylon? Was there like more commingling? Like, what's your thought on that? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah. Well, what I think is, first we got to like define what we're talking about with astrology.
Yeah.
Like what do we mean by astrology? Because astrology ranges from calculating the calendars. Astrology ranges from calculating which direction you need to pray to predicting whether or not I'm going to ever find a new job.
Mm-hmm.
So on one hand, maybe predictive astrology has an origin in Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
And horoscopic astrology probably in Greece. But on the other hand, the very concept of astrology itself is ingrained in the human nature. It's ingrained in every living being's nature, not just humans. I mean, every animal bases their cycles of life on the way the sun is moving around the earth. And they do different things when winter is approaching and when, everybody is cued into the time clock. You can't even avoid it. So human beings since the beginning have been looking at time in two ways, because that's what you do when you look at the sky, is you look at time. So they've been looking at it in terms of, let's figure out what's going on right now and in the future based on where the sun is. Because you can do that during the day. You can measure light. So that's when you can tell what time of year it is, et cetera. So that's why every kind of culture, I mean, it's hard. You're hard pressed to present one or two cultures that don't have a 12-fold way of looking at the year. Maybe Mayans are like 9.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard. I mean, most cultures in the world come up with this pretty clear idea that, hey, the sun has these 4 key marker points and you get 12 moons in each one.
Mm-hmm.
So let's divide it into 12 sections. And then the other thing that's interesting that they do is they also look at the stars at night. And when you're looking at the stars at night, you see where the moon is. And so in the fundamental human way of looking at the sky to figure out what's going on, ingrained in that is the dichotomy between tropical and sidereal. Because at nighttime, they're looking at stars, and that's what sidereal means. Sidereal means stellar.
Mm-hmm.
And in the daytime, they're looking at sunlight. And that's what tropos is all about. Where's the sun in reference to its key markers, its key turning points? So they actually developed these two systems. And the beauty of the system that I believe in and I work with is to have a sidereal and a tropical side by side working together. But not the 12-fold zodiac is solar. The sidereal way of things is based on stars. It's going to be not 12. It's not based on how the moon intersects the sun. Rather, it's based on how the days and nights the sun intersects the moon's orbit. So you get 27 or 28 most of the time.
And that might be in astrology's inception if we do concede that it is Babylonian, because you mentioned again in Chris's talk about Mualpen, right? And one of the things that I wanted to clarify is that in terms of I understand it, there was an attention given to the seasons in that calendar. It was not completely, even when it was 18 or more.
Right, in Babylon, yeah.
Yeah, it was more so the conception of thinking about it in relation to the seasons. Now, obviously you could say like, well, then that was more on the sidereal calendar. I'm like, well, it was pretty much the same goddamn thing for a while. And it might have been even a little bit off more toward the sidereal, as we might even call it, not completely tropical, if we go back 5,000 years. So, I mean, like, that's a whole different thing. So, yeah.
So what's indigenous to India and what came from outside? Indigenous to India, they were trying to time their activities. They're trying to time their activities so that they would be the most productive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you'll find in Vedic books that are 3,000 to 5,000 years old. That you should wait for this star to be on the ascendant, actually. And now that I've studied it, I realize they're not talking really about the moon's nakshatra, but they're talking about the ascending star. But you should wait for this star to rise.
Is that more than the lagna? But is the lagna tied to a particular rasi, or is it tied
to a nakshatra?
Nakshatra. Okay. Yeah,
they would say when the sun sets. I actually came across this quote as I was studying Taittiriya Brahmana. They said, when the sun is out, you can't see the nakshatras, but when the sun sets, as soon as it sets, then you can see the star that's rising. So it either means that they're looking for the sun's nakshatra. Because you know how you could do that? You could find the star that's close to the sun right when the sun sets. But it probably more likely means they're going to look at the east because it's darker over there. Literally, as soon as the sun sets, you should be able to see a star on the eastern horizon.
Eastern horizon, right?
So
Okay.
it's one of the two, but it's not the moon.
And that's kind of even what I teach my students usually, is that the nakshatras are indigenous.
Yeah, nakshatras are indigenous, and the way they used them was electional.
Right. So
They didn't.
that's kind of. I'm sorry. Go on.
Yeah, so they didn't they weren't doing birth, they weren't doing horoscopic astrology. They had a 12-fold system, of course, and they had a calendar based on it, and they had events, and they had ceremonies based on that, the 12-fold solar system too. And then they had this 27 nakshatra system, but they weren't using either one, apparently, as far as we know, as far as I know. They weren't using either one for personal astrology, Jataka astrology, we call it, for horoscopic astrology. They didn't do that. That probably came from the Yavanas, the foreigners.
Okay, and that was going to be my next question. So, I mean, that becomes important in terms of this whole sidereal tropical debate, and that even clarifies your position why you also talk about sidereal nakshatras, but a tropical rasi, right? So you're integrating day and night, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, I got that idea. Okay, that's cool. I guess, just to kind of start wrapping things up, one question I have for you then is, how do you feel about the evangelical zeal of siderealists? And let me give you some background on that in terms of my own encounter with it. It's not actually from Indians, right? I don't get that as much. I mean, more recently, because as you know, I'm sure you follow Indian news maybe as closely as I have. And just to give you some background with that, I spent 3 months in India in 97, and then I did another month in 2007, a lot of Indian friends and whatever. So I've, have a vested interest in India. I was also going to expatriate for a while, from the United States into India. So with the BJP kind of ascending, I know it's kind of changed the color of what I say romantically, and I'm owning it as much, of my India. I was kind of like, what have you done? He's like, it's more like what's happening to your birth country, in terms of its nationalism and things like that. So it's become very rigid. But before that, my encounter with siderealists more came from my community, Black community, because there's a whole swath of people who believe a couple things that are not historically verified. I'm not saying they're not historically possible, but not verified, who believe that the Egyptians created astrology and that they use the sidereal zodiac, and that the way to kind of do astrology is sidereal. And so they're very beholden to that. So, I would talk about, I'm an astrologer, and it would always be like, so brother, what zodiac do you use? And I'm like, I use the tropical. And then they were like, oh, well, I use the correct zodiac. I use the sidereal zodiac. So I'm just curious, when you encounter that, I mean, I guess you're getting a lot of that, a lot of vehemence the more you're talking about it, right? Is that your experience? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think I can understand their point of view, because it's very confusing, because as I kind of said before, the sidereal way of doing astrology and the tropical way of doing astrology have existed side by side since the beginning in every culture. So if you go back in your history and you search for Babylon or Egyptians using sidereal astrology, or Indians, you're going to find it. Mm-hmm. But if you go back and look for them using tropical astrology, you'll also find it. And also the astrology that they'll be doing will be different than what we're doing today.
Right.
So yeah, the Egyptians, they were using sidereal things, but they were using 33. Mm-hmm. And then Babylonians, but they were using sidereal constellations, 18 of them. It's not the 12.
Right.
And the Indians also, they had 27. Chinese have 28.
Right.
This is not, why are you calling this the zodiac? This is something else. These are the constellations.
Yeah, and asterisms even specifically, which could include what we call now even the constellations, right? So,
and then also I think I understand why they call it the zodiac, because at a certain point when they started using the 12-fold zodiac, they started relating it to the stars, because you can see stars.
Right.
So you can check your math. So I kind of just sympathize with the people that I see why you're so zealous and you think that it's so true, because you can find your evidence. Mm-hmm. But it's annoying. And there's one Indian nakshatra called Jeshta, which gave me a lot of insight into what's actually happening. Jeshta's sutra, the key thing to understand Jeshta is Shrinat, Prastat, Pratishrinat, Avastat. Jeshta is the star for politicians or people who want to be the best. Jeshta means the best. What they need to do is they need to make you attack. And then, because that enables them to counterattack, looking as if, that enables them to so-called counterattack. But what they're really doing is attacking. So they'll try to provoke your attack.
Is that the snake?
No, it's not the snake.
Oh, okay.
The snake one is all about like attachments and things, but this is the Indra nakshatra, the king's nakshatra, the one who wants to be the best. So what happens if you react to the zealousness of the evangelical person who believes in their zodiac, nobody really sees it from the beginning. They don't see that person provoked you, especially because we have really strong arguments and they don't. Right. So when we respond vociferously and with power, and then all of a sudden it looks like we're like steamrolling over these people. And then the onlookers they're actually like, would you please chill out and calm down? Why are you killing this guy? Why are you steamrolling all over this guy? That's what I experienced.
I understand. And so what, on a different angle with that, I mean, it's also, I see, like I even saw an astrologer, a sidereal astrologer, a Jyotishi, who, was on Twitter saying, the tropical zodiac is wrong. I mean, like, I don't often see many tropicalists come for siderealists as much as siderealists seem to come for us. So they seem more on attack. Why do you think that is? Is it just basic insecurity, or
maybe it's minority? They're in the minority, so they may have to defend themselves more.
But they're going on the attack. It's not just defense. It's not like someone's going around like, that's bullshit. Why are you doing that? Like, it just seems more or less like, no, we're doing the true zodiac.
I don't know. The way that it worked out with me was the way that it worked
for you. Okay.
The way that it worked with me was I just made my switch. But this also reveals the nature of truth and lies. And this is from Mula Nakshatra, which teaches us this. The next nakshatra after Jeshta Nakshatra shows you how to tell the difference between a truth and a lie. And the truth is quiet. It doesn't need to be vociferous because it's true. But the lie is always very vociferous and agitating because it's trying to establish itself.
I see.
So what happened with me was I just switched to tropical, but because I switched to tropical, everybody takes it as a attack.
Well, I mean, let me ask you about something you did say on Chris's show that I was like, it piqued my interest. You said literally, the sidereal zodiac is wrong. I mean, that's a very strong statement. Well, not strong, but I mean, it's a very direct statement of quote unquote right and wrong. I mean, so you all also, are you saying then it is a lie? It's wrong.
It's wrong to take the 12 divisions of the sun's path and remove them from the solar reference points and affix them to the stellar reference points. That's wrong.
Okay.
There is right and wrong. I'm sorry. That's
don't be
wrong.
Sorry. You don't be sorry.
But
I mean, I know you have a strong buddhi, but I mean, I think you also have a strong shani, right? So
yeah. So very good. So but there is a right sidereal thing, but it's not a zodiac. It's not a 12 division represented by animals. It's different in different cultures. It's different according to how you do it. The very cool way that India does it is they divide the moon's path into days. So they take 13 1/3 degree segments for the moon's daily motion. And they get 27 and some change. So they idealize it as 27. That's very reasonable. That's exactly what we did with the solar zodiac. We divided the sun's monthly motion.
Right.
So it's not that sidereal astrology is wrong. Sidereal astrology is ancient. It's ancient.
But it's applied to the wrong
thing. The zodiac is not supposed to be sidereal.
Right. It's
something else is that the stars are sidereal.
So the sidereal zodiac makes no sense, but siderealism makes sense if we can put it as it is. I got it. Okay, that's interesting. So why do you think Indians hold on to the sidereal zodiac? I mean, I know you mentioned the word investment. Is it like because they're so invested in it, or I mean, financially even? I mean, like, why do they hold on to it?
Why? They put it, I think every culture put referenced their tropical, there's tropical zodiac, they referenced it to stars two millennium ago when they started doing the math. But with India, I don't know if we can say that their indigenous sidereal system was more developed than the Egyptians and the Babylonians. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was more ingrained in their culture. Because really every important thing in their culture was decided by these elections based on the sidereal, based on the nakshatras. Or maybe they're just more traditional than the other cultures and less open to change. So, or maybe it's a combination of those things. But for whatever reason, after they aligned the 12 zodiac divisions to their 27 nakshatras, they said, this is it.
All right. Okay. And so now
this is it. We're not, and they said, but there's Ayanamsa. And they said, no, thanks. But you'll get a couple of centuries of confusion about it. Up to the author of Varahamihira, who's a very important Indian astrologer.
Mm-hmm.
In Varahamihira, he voices in a few places, why are we not moving? Why are we not updating the Ayanamsa point? Why are we not updating the equinox? The equinox is not in the same nakshatra it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't changed anything. We're just going along with tradition. Why? I don't know if that means that he did it tropically or if he was just voicing his confusion or trying to get an answer to this question or what. But in his books, I think it's Panchasiddhantika has one very clear statement.
Okay.
Where he says that. Why are we not moving our thing? So apparently there was some centuries where it wasn't exactly that everybody accepted that, no, it has to be sidereal. It has to be, Ashvini has to start with Aries.
Mm-hmm.
It took some time for it to solidify, but probably around 1,500 years ago, a little after Varahamihira, it probably became like set in stone. And then in India, once something is set in stone, it's very difficult to unset it.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
But it's not that it's unheard of. Now, if you look at people in the 18th century, 19th century, like B.S. Dikshita and N.C. Lahiri.
Okay.
Yeah, N.C. Lahiri, who on the Calendar Reform Committee that established Lahiri Ayanamsa, that report, that Calendar Reform report says, it really has to be tropical, but we can't do this. We can't make it tropical because everybody will revolt.
Well, he says that.
This is a paraphrase, but it's a very close paraphrase. I don't remember his exact words, but he says, if we want to make this reform correct, we would have to make it tropical. We would have to align it with the solstices and equinoxes. But the population is not going to accept that. It's too different from what they're used to. It's 23 days different from what they're used to. So we're going to standardize something based on this mathematician from such and such century. So it's more in line with something somebody can accept today. But then they say, but in the future, we hope that further reforms will be made.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not like Ernst Willem just popped out of the blue and said, hey guys, it should be tropical. There's indigenous Indian people. And to this day, there's also people who have nothing to do with this Ernst Willem tribe. And there's Indian people in South India who are like, they don't use a sidereal calendar. There's actually like South Indian temples that use solar tropical calendars.
Wait, Tamil or Kerala or some other place in between?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. But actually, it's been too long since I was really into all this and investigating. I've even forgotten their names.
Okay.
But if you look up, I think it's Tamil. If you look up like just Indian calendar, tropical Indian calendar or something, you probably wind up.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, because I know there's different even aspects of astrology that, like Nadi astrology. I had some Nadi performed in Kerala. So, I mean, that's kind of a different conception of it.
Yeah. Now I have a friend who studies Nadi. Mm-hmm. And he's written a couple of very interesting articles showing that the Nadi texts show that they were probably using tropical zodiacs.
Oh, wow.
The sages that wrote because they have the nakshatras in different rashis than what we have them today.
Okay, see, that's even more fascinating.
And then those statements will get expunged.
Uh-huh.
The editor who makes the next edition will expunge that. But even to this day, you still have surviving records of these anomalous nakshatras that aren't in rashis that they're supposed to be in from ancient reports of how they were doing astrology.
Well, that's fascinating. Well, I'm going to wrap up the recording. And thank you, Vic, for doing this and talking with me. And like I said, I'll send it to you, and you can have it up for your viewers.
Great,
But
thank you.
I appreciate it. So let me just stop the recording.